And here we are at the Scroll of Thoth once again. Your host, Friday Threscoronis, James L. Wilbur, and my two new co-hosts. So let's go around here and have you guys introduce yourselves. Let people know who you are. Start with Frater Zentra L there.
Yes, Frater Zentra L, a priest of chaos and a third degree in the Luminates of Thanateros, and one of the founding members and PRs in the Order of Emergent Magi, working on developing this emergent magic paradigm. This will be the second time we've done a little podcast about this, and yeah, we'll go from here.
I'm David Zine, otherwise known as Sator Latrantis, fourth degree in the Luminates of Thanateros. I'm mostly here just to keep these kids honest.
Which we definitely need.
Yeah, right, mostly. Yeah, me probably mostly, but yep.
Yeah, we rely too much on bullshit. And I am, of course, if anyone's listened to this podcast before, fourth degree in the Illuminats of Thanateros. I am the scribe for the Order of Emergent Magi. And, here we are. We're rebranding, renaming the podcast and making it all about emergent magic. So my start for all this is, and I want to see if Frater Zentra L, Jason agrees.
Okay.
So I think we've discovered that the Order of Emergent Magi and emergent magic are two different things. The Order of Emergent Magi does emergent magic, but it's its own thing. But emergent magic is a school of thought, a philosophy, a system by itself.
Yeah, and I think first of all, that's not really something that we discovered. That's something that pretty much to us by our departed friend Evelyn. Was magical name Morticia Salva, right?
Yep.
She pretty much had called that out from the beginning. And the first conversations that we were kind of having about emergent magic, her big whole take on the whole thing was, yeah, that's all fine. That's a whole good idea. I like the concept of emergent magic. Saying you can't have emergent magic and you draw people in with that, and that's like very, that appeals to a very wide group of magicians and people. Pretty much everybody that's practicing magic is my theory. Everybody that's practiced magic well and for a long period of time eventually rolls into what it is essentially is emergent magic. But then, as in her words, but then you can't slap them upside the head with the gutter Bible. Because that's kind of a, that even though that is the AMK system and that's what inspired the whole thing and kind of gives a framework for it, and a tradition rather than just a meta paradigm, like more theories like chaos magic is. But at the same time, I don't even think so much that Order of Emergent Magi or OM, like our group, as it expands, is really even itself specifically, gutterites or people that are working that paradigm primarily, although some people will be. I mean, the really other thing that pulls it all together is using the emergent pentagram ritual, which is you've got to have one kind of keystone to build up around. And yeah, so I guess there's that. There's a blending. I mean,
Okay.
what do you think?
I think you're right. I think that, emergent magic is what the order does, and the whole gutter Bible and thing is our illumination paradigm.
Yeah, and that's like your straight EMK. That's when when you get into EMK versus emergent magic, they are two different things. And I did want to, from the initial point when I was coming up with all this terminology, coming up with Order of Emergent Magi, the words and or emergent magic, the words and all this kind of I did want to differentiate from the beginning, like EMK is a little bit different than emergent magic because I kind of knew it was physical. It's just at the beginning it was all that one paradigm, which our good and Evelyn kind of called us out on a lot. And I think that was big contribution to OM and to the whole thing is that she, you know, in a lot of ways, the Gutter Bible is you and me and a couple other people's, you know, crazy ego trip to rebuild the universe. Whereas Emergent Magick is a different way of looking at stuff, and it's includes some out in the additional paradigms of stuff that's come up in the last 100 years.
Emergent Magick's our crazy ego trip to move beyond the chaos magic era. So
right into a new pandemonium aeon, a new aeon of magical thinking. It's been 30 years since Liber and Psychonaut is a good cycle. And it makes sense to me that magical thinking is going to take some kind of leaps at some point, you know, through some group of people.
Okay.
Just like it was for chaos magic back in the day. I mean, there was only a few people, you know, that really started. Yeah.
Before we go any further, Jason, you might want to turn your camera off because you keep breaking up. Your voice keeps going robot.
Okay.
If you turn the camera off, you can use less bandwidth. So if you move your mouse around towards the top, you got it? You got it.
Cool.
Sweet. Yeah, you know, that was something I was talking about when we were together in February, is like the whole basis for the English magical revival started in the French magical revival, which was like a dozen people hanging around drinking absinthe. So, you know, we've got a good start. But I want David Zai to jump in here.
Here's my my real question. You know, as a potential first time listener here who's never tuned in and has no clue as to what Emergent Magick is. I mean, Magick, how is it different than any other pre-existing paradigm or meta paradigm that's already out there?
Okay. Right. And so, you know, so to get into it, I think the key parts are first of all, it's not a results-based magic like chaos magic is, and it's also not a spiritual-based magic like Thelema or Golden Dawn or Wicca or any neo-paganism, you know, kind of would be. It's neither of those things, because it deals more with consciousness and altering one's consciousness through, you know, through an inner kind of way rather than an outer. You know, and I think that's kind of the stated goal of it. The stated goal of chaos magic, it was very pragmatic. They come right out and say, like, this is not about spiritual stuff. This is about getting results in the real world. And that's great and has developed a lot of good techniques, but it ends up just being an empty bucket in the end. Anybody that practices magic for any long period of time. And, you know, so good chaos magicians, they're emergent kind of, you know, they're technically usually not on a certain specific paradigm. You know, they've got some stuff that they, you know, work with for a time and don't work with for a time. And as that develops, you know, that's kind of what becomes emergence. You know, it's not chaos that's happening as you're developing these rituals and these paradigms. I mean, much like your party monster thing. Okay, so when you are presenting that, you know, your deities about it, they weren't something picked out of a book and just done like ABC. You know, they evolved, and you mentioned like some of the characters being combinations of more than one of the personalities you're originally looking at, and that kind of stuff there. That's all emergence, and that's you know, that process, even though the techniques might be chaos magic, you know, you've got a list of tools and stuff. When magic is done well, and you can always tell when it's done well because you can't fake that kind of stuff. When people are showing their work and talking about the stuff that they do magically, you can really tell. I mean, we can tell, people that have been doing magic for a long time and have, you know, been to 100 rituals and you know, just seen a lot of different spiritual stuff. It's really hard to kind of fake that, you know, whereas you know, chaos magic you can fake all day because you just have to keep a journal and put the results in there, and even if there are no results, write it down and blah blah. Whereas emergent, more of a personal development. Now, that moving to my second point, which is emergent magic is a ancestral based type of
well,
magic.
hold on. because I'm going to disagree with the founder
All right, kick it out.
on a couple of these points. So number one, emergent magic is not inherently spiritual, but can be.
I would say that, yeah, right. I mean, it could be totally atheistic. You're correct.
Yeah, it could be totally atheistic, but it could also be emergent. The spirit model can fit into emergent magic.
Maybe spiritual is the wrong word I'm looking for.
You know, it's a crazy word.
Right,
it's
right.
So, and I would also say, yes, it's about consciousness, but you might have some different definitions of what consciousness is.
I think the word I want more is mysticism. You know, Carol rails a lot against, devolving into mysticism, and I think that's a little bit more where I'm getting to. Whereas as chaos magic doesn't really have a laid out system. Emergent magic and the Ogham kind of do in a certain way because of like my second point that I want to get to, because I think the other big thing is the ancestral aspect to it. Like there really is no ancestor magic stuff talked about in chaos magic, more or less, in any of the chaos magic literature. I mean, you could say some type of, I don't know, egregorically could be considered, ancestral in some types of ways, but it's not specific. Whereas in our paradigm, we tend to like our concepts of ancestral altars and stuff that comes before you. Now you don't see that in Wicca, you don't see that in a lot of neo-paganism. You do see it in the ATRs, so African tradition, and the thing is, those are heavily weighted traditions. Those are the traditions. There are a lot of them. Most of them, I mean, the personal traditions are at least a few hundred years old. I mean, you're talking about religions that are 400, 500, 600, 700 years old that these people are practicing, and kind of an uncomfortability about, like white guys from the Midwest that are into Cthulhu magic, like just jumping into Voodoo. It's in some ways, to me, it's insincere. Like, and you'll hear some practitioners, talk about that, like, get your own spirituality, white boys, kind of thing. And this is that. This is very much our own spirituality and our own tradition. It's like white boys. It's our white boy palo. That's our tradition that we've started. And then each person individually has their own kind of ancestral stuff, and it's not like that has a central part, but that's something that is talked about. Certainly, it's something that certainly we're coming into contact with. Like we're dealing directly with ancestral stuff because of our personal lives and the events of the last few years, how things have unfolded. And the honest truth is, everybody deals with ancestral stuff in the end because we're all going to die.
Okay,
and,
let me rewind you. Okay, so emergent magic. Let's get on to let's go to the emergence part. I'm sorry, Zai, if you need to jump in, go ahead. But so emergent magic is always informed by what you learned while doing magic, what you learned under gnosis, it is a wisdom, it is received.
Right.
So what you learn under gnosis plus emergent magic always includes a group. Right. So it's what other people also perceive in your paradigm. In emergent magic, you don't shift paradigms. You continue the paradigm and learn more and more about it and adapt it and change it as you learn. But you don't shift unless there's someone else in your group that you're working with their paradigm and you're influencing that. So all your paradigms are merging together. Now, ancestor worship is important because it's about building a bonds of a tribe. It is the oldest form of magic. It's the oldest form of worship. It's the oldest religion, according to a lot of anthropologists. So including that as a direct line and using what you learn under gnosis to build a paradigm with others.
Right. And again, a lot of this, I think I mentioned this before, is like when I first met Frater, who was Frater Ratatosk at the time. Josh Wetzel has books published, so I can say his name. He, Tim was asking about a name they're using for a temple of some sort. Or a temple, I believe, or a magical name. I was like, "Where'd you get that magical name from?" And he's like, "From a ritual," rather matter of factly. And that always kind of stuck with me. And from that point on, like all the magic that I would do essentially would go that way. Like you only will very much start at the very beginning of, your journey towards something with something you get out of a book or in like an old seal or an old entity, and then you work with it. And of course that went on when we got the Gutter Bible, because the Gutter Bible is completely nonsense. So in order to build the paradigm through it, we had to really kind of reach down and really do some hard work to kind of pull it out, because there was no instructions for it. Another thing, EMK being the slow magic, and we're talking about building a paradigm over a really slow period of time in emergent magic. So essentially what we're doing is like one of the good Dr. Frater Hackwin's things at the beginning of coming up with this was, okay, well, we're going to do, we have the idea of the grid of spirits for the second book. So that's 16 entities. It's like, well, we could do that in the night, we could do that in the night, have that all ready to go in the morning. And that's kind of the chaos magic approach to it. You could, intellectually come up with 16 different entities, find sigils for them, make, names, come up with mantras, blah, blah, blah. But it takes a lot more work to slowly let those entities reveal themselves over years through work with lots of different magicians throughout the world, basically, people from all over with different backgrounds. And that's our idea of the net, net filters with OM is, you don't have all chaos magicians developing this. You don't have all Wiccans that work together. The point of OM, you have people with different traditions. As we're not initiated tradition, people seek out initiations in their own ways, then it kind of come together. It's more kind of a conglomerate work on one thing.
People need to really understand what you mean by slow. We're not talking days. We're not talking weeks, months, years, or decades. We're talking generational.
Yeah.
If your tribe has strong ancestors, strong traditions, it carries on. New people come in, old people leave, some people pass away, they have kids, and bring them into this tribe. This is what you should be aiming your magic at, to continue. And I think one of the goals of emergent magic is to rebuild a legitimate magical tradition in the West.
Yeah, I like that too. And not necessarily, when you're talking about family, and I thought about this earlier, not just necessarily always talking about blood family when it comes to magical work. Like, when it comes to people that you're spiritually inclined with, there's going to be a lot of overlap with that, but that's not going to always be that way. Just because of the nature of, the lack of spirituality in the world today, and the nature of, what magic is, what it represents, and, how it's done. People are so few and far between, that are kind of drawn to that. But I would agree with you. But I'd also just say, in general, not really necessarily talking about, your blood children, and necessarily, although of course that's always great too. It's about trying to. Emergent magic is different because emergent magic wants to create a tradition, a tradition that keeps going on. We're talking about building a grid of, or discovering really grid of spirits, in these entities. Like, that's the grimoire for the rest of, our lives, me, you, and me, and then hopefully, 100 years after we're gone, people are still working with it, and, periodically putting out more information as it kind of solidifies and develops, and it'll be an ongoing thing. That's the idea, at least.
That's how you create a magical tradition with true depth.
Right.
Together, it also sounds, I mean, obviously very organic. It feels very alive, something that would take flight kind of on its own. And forgive me, but I'm a musician. And what keeps coming back to mind here is it's almost as if you guys are describing the way jazz worked. Jazz obviously was way different than, say, classical music, which was very, you write a song down and you have people that have mastered their instruments perform it perfectly. Whereas jazz is much more of a living, open-ended thing where you have these masters of their instruments, but they're creating a very living, moving piece. And I keep thinking of that in my mind. This EMK sounds very similar in that respect, which really does. Jazz drew from voodoo culture as well, and I mean that was also a very living tradition. So
yeah, I think
somebody here's a big fan of jam bands. So
yeah, I think that's a really good analogy of how it was so different because and that's kind of like Pollock when he first came out. Even like Picasso was kind of weird, but you can still kind of see like but that's totally different when it's just like drops of paint. And like jazz was kind of that way too. And even like different forms of jazz. Like I remember, reading about Django Reinhardt and his crew, the Hot Club of France, these guys were all hardcore jazz guys. Well, when bebop showed up, bebop records, it caused such a rift that it broke up the Hot Club of France. It broke up the Hot Club of France like permanently because some people just could not handle bebop. It was too weird and too fucked. People like that kind of like created this huge like rift. It's kind of the same way like some people that were into classical got into jazz. Obviously a lot of people didn't, especially at first. So definitely there's going to be a lot of people that practice magic that are like, what the fuck are these guys talking about? But at the same time, other people would be like, okay, I see, this is totally fucking different. It's not
it's the second time
like before where
someone's mentioned French nightclubs, but go on.
Right, yeah. So it's not like okay, before like it's like this is how you are a magician, blah blah, and then you could dress that up different, like dress it Golden Dawn, dress it up Wiccan, be a chaos magician or a different all these different ways. Whereas OM doesn't really have that. We're not really saying that. It's not really there isn't a really like this thing, but at the same time, the people that we're doing the same stuff. Like we're still playing instruments. We do know magic. Everybody knows a little bit different magic, different types of instruments, different types of ways to interact with the magic. But it's a different way of approaching it. And I mean, just us from the beginning recognizing and saying this is a totally different way of approaching it is just making it be so.
and that reminds me of one of the things that really annoys the fuck out of me when it comes to magic in the 21st century in the West. We have this really naive belief that we could go to a bookstore, get a book on magic, go into our basement, do everything that's in the book, and suddenly we're fucking magicians. It does not fucking work that way. You can do magic that way, but you are missing out on half of what magic is if you do not practice with other people.
Yeah, that's true. I think there's definitely, we've talked before, I think there's definitely a lot to be said about magical literature and the of it that's out there, and how much of it is really any good. All these like self-initiate at home into like super dragon fairy magic and so on and so on. Celtic wood initiations, and the proliferation of the magical books, even in just the last few years, it seems like every couple years there's just more and more and more. And most of it reads just kind of like fantasy, so I'd agree with you. It's definitely, you can't just go buy a crystal and you're a wizard.
And also, we're not saying you don't have to join the OTO, you don't have to join the IoT, you don't have to join any fucking group. Start your own. That would be the best thing to do. Start your own. Find your own group. You can come to Rockford and hang with us if you want, but
come out to Babylon and go to the Sabbat.
Definitely go to fucking Babylon. I would say a lot of this was learned at Babylon, right?
Yeah, that's where it started. That's when we started doing the public knowledge with it, and a lot of the little finer points came up from conversations. Just conversations that happened there, and different rituals that happened there, and working with different groups. Obviously the IoT was really heavy in influencing the first part of book one. A lot of the heavy lifting and the big parts of the rituals, the progression was definitely done by the IoT, which is good, and because Pact has, highly trained magicians, and that's great. But, it was done internationally. So there's such a variance between chaos magicians in America and Austria and England and, say, Germany and South America.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with joining those groups either, if that's your bag.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, there was OTO people involved from the beginning with this as well, pretty heavily in a couple other groups as well.
And, treat them as your tribe. But one thing I wanted to throw in there real quick is that most of our long-term listeners know about Babylon Rising. Babylon Rising is a festival that's held in southern Indiana every June. Go look for BabylonRising.com, BABALON rising.com to check that out, because it's highly fucking recommended.
Yeah, of course. There's lots of, there's full-on seminars there on pretty much all different aspects and types of magic for several days. So if you're going want to find a place to go learn about magic and participate, that's a great way to do it, definitely. I wish I would have had that when I was 10 years before I did.
Can you imagine finding that when you're 18? Oh, shit.
Zai, any other thoughts?
Yeah, they're like you fucking youngin'.
No, I mean, not at this point in time necessarily. I don't know. I kind of like the. Let's go back to the. You talked a lot at first about emergent magic being the altering of one's consciousness, as opposed to any other pursuit that's happened before within magic. I know one of the things that you have said, right. Magic without drugs isn't. And the first time I think I heard you say that, I felt like it was a little bit. But I mean, I think it brings up a really solid point. Like throughout the eons,
right.
have been used by magicians, shamans, and mystics, and all of that. So maybe talk about how that can play into it. How that's
okay. I definitely drugs is there's once you lick.
Do you want me to
forget the taste?
You're breaking up out there. Go ahead. Oh, you were breaking up. Did you want to continue, or you want me to talk?
Okay.
I'm going. Okay. So I just wrote this chapter for the book, so it's kind of fresh from my memory. Dolphins will pass around a pufferfish to fucking get high. Monkeys will find fermented fruit to eat for the alcohol. Birds will fucking do it too. Certain animals will eat fungus to get high. So it is part of us as an animal to do drugs. There are certain things in our genetics that developed for us to get high. This is a part of who we are. And it was the cause of civilization. When you go to places like Göbekli Tepe, which is 8,000 years older than Stonehenge, they have these vats that they found residue, and they're certain that this is where they came to make beer. I mean, that's the first thing we wanted to do. So drugs are part of the human experience. And they are the best way to alter consciousness reliably, period. So let's say you're a carpenter, right? You want to build a house. I got a hammer and nails. I can hammer and nails with a rock. You can fucking do it. It's okay. Or you could use a hammer, and that would be a whole lot fucking better. And drugs are the hammer.
Or a fucking nail gun, if you want to look at it like that.
Yeah, they are always reliable. They will always work. So that's why drugs.
I mean, that makes perfect sense to me, obviously, as somebody who's involved themselves with certain chemo-gnostic paths. But how have your personal experiences like driven EMK? You know, what what was it about those consciousness expanding experiences that really led you to this place with EMK and wanting to develop a path like this?
Jason?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'd like to just touch back just for a second on another thing. You know, we talked a little bit just briefly about, you know, the shamanistic idea of the communal psychedelic experience. And it's a major reoccurring theme in modern times is, you know, just generally, you know, the whole tribe getting around a fire, you know, taking the shaman's brew, having a psychedelic experience as a group ritual, as a group experience. That's at the core of the beginnings of magic. And that's missing in modern times is why you have, you know, rave culture, why you have, you know, people that follow jam bands around, you know, why the explosion of LSD happened in the 60s, because people just did not have that experience anymore. It was washed away by religion over thousands of years.
In fact, that's that's the second core ritual of EMK. Is
right, and you see this now. You see it with all these people. You've got all these straight people, these younger generation that are going down to South America to take ayahuasca. It's a huge movement. All these kids, regularly straight edge people in the professional world, and like seeking out these shamans to, like, you know, take ayahuasca, you know, do these different experiences, and you know, it's coming back into vogue, if you will. You know, people are starting to realize that science is starting to catch up with the fact that psychedelics can be, you know, pretty helpful in a lot of different situations. You know, so bringing back that psychedelic experience and making that center point, you know, that's what, you know, Chaos Magic missed out on that. You know, Peter Carroll just kind of, you know, psychedelic experience, you know, drugs in general, chemonosis is just kind of pushed to the side and just mentioned as like an afterthought, like, oh, well, also sometimes people use drugs to do their rituals. Like, what do you, I mean, it's like, they only use drugs to do rituals for the first 10,000 fucking years. I mean, the oracles in Greece, I mean, just, you know, all that shit. I mean, these guys, all the shamanistic stuff, it was not really until more modern times that you see that kind of squashed out. And that leads to, I think, a lot of our modern problems, you know, through, you know, industrialization and you know, what we deal with in day-to-day life now.
Just a question, because you've met the man. Cake. So Peter Carroll, do you think that he was suffering like from when Crowley, you know, wouldn't really talk about sex, he had to hide it? Do you think that Carroll was doing the same thing about drugs because it was the 80s and everyone was fucking against drugs?
Maybe 30 years ago, it was too hardcore of a thing to say magic done without drugs, isn't?
Yeah.
I never thought about it that way, but I don't really think so. I mean, I think that I've always found most of the chaos stuff that is out there doesn't really, well, none of it that I know of really embraces psychedelia as a major part of it. You know, books on chaos magic don't have a chapter on psychedelia. Not any that I've ever read.
The current guys do. Like Julian Vane, he's a member of MAPS, and you know, he's totally into it.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, he's got the Pharmacon is directly a book about shamanistic drugs and psychedelic experiences, I'd say, though. But I mean, you may be right. There may be starting to be some mention of it, but in general, you know, the traditional chaos stuff, you know, there's not a lot that talks about that, and it's definitely, you know, it's never put as a forerunner of chaos magic. Anytime you read any stuff about chaos magic, it's going to tell you that it's non-dogmatic and it's results oriented and it doesn't have a specific paradigm and it's a meta paradigm. They're not going to say, and also you should be tripping balls.
Well, I certainly don't remember Phil Hine telling me to drop acid. So,
well, good job, Phil.
Hey, that's some condensed chaos. Anyway, it's a good book. Actually, people should read it. So, yeah. What else did we want to say? To me, the Sabbat. That's what I call that. The taking of the ritual psychedelics and dancing by the fire and having the drums. That place.
Yeah, drums, fire, dancing. Yeah, the three.
You know,
DFD.
Yeah, the psychedelics, you know, are the death of self. It's a total reinitiation ritual for the entire tribe. They all go through it. is really the second central rite of EMK. I mean, that's what you got to do, or else I don't think your brain's prepared for magic without that. I don't think it can be.
Honestly, I think that's a really beautiful thing, because you kind of, Jason, you mentioned earlier, the reason we have rave culture, jam band culture, is because really we have a lot of people within our society reaching out for this particular experience. And so to give somebody something to reach for within a paradigm that actually serves as some sort of rite of passage or ritualistic experience with this, gives this experience a context to latch onto, which I think is kind of a fucking important thing. But, when you talk about wanting this to be a generational thing that exists, how would you see that going forward? I mean, do you see like, how do you give your generations behind you a context with which to be somewhat responsible during these shamanic episodes with whatever they're imbibing in? Might not be, you know what I mean?
What? I guess we're not. The question being, how do you get future generations to continue what you're doing?
Yeah, well, to some extent. I mean, when you're talking about wanting this to become a generational thing,
you do that by honoring ancestors. So we have an honored ancestor in our tribe, and she has passed behind the veil, so she will be honored by everyone at every time we meet. When new people come into the circle, they're going to know her name. When new people come into the circle 20 years from now, they're going to know her name. She is our ancestor. She helps us see what's beyond the veil. And that's how you do, that's to me the anchor of how do you keep a generational tradition going.
Yeah, I would say. Can you guys hear?
Yep.
Yeah, I would say that there's not a lot of that in a lot of the other traditions. You don't really see a lot of that kind of carrying on tradition, and of course, Dr. Dave's another person we can talk about that's kind of obviously beyond the veil as well, and was instrumental in starting up with OM. So, I mean, these things are kind of more like the mysterious parts of life, if you will. But I certainly think that it's a cornerstone of the whole. The idea of family and tradition, and starting a new tradition, and the idea that this new tradition, you can take this tradition and wherever you are, you can just find people and start it for yourself and have it be legitimate, and have it be, a bona fide tradition. It's something that, you've got people, you get a hold of that questions about shit, if you're thinking about stuff, you've got some literature to give you some idea, and you don't need to don't need to jump through any hoops, so you don't need to fill out an application or anything like that. This is open sourced spirituality, if you will. And that's different from the IoT and the OTO and most small Wiccan groups, where you have you have different levels of initiation, and you have people that are higher level adepts or lower level, and you might have initiation fees and stuff like that. You can get thrown out if you're in trouble. I mean, other than being in trouble with your own tribe, you're not going to get thrown out anything, because you're never going to get let in anything. And I think once you do that, once you're giving it away for free, once the whole thing is just about the magic and not about some kind of ego trip, it frees you up from a lot of the problems that groups, and that we hopefully can avoid with our group, and our movement, if you will.
Though it is okay if you buy a book. We can make a little money that way. Just want to remind people to buy a book. So yeah, that's one of the best things about it is this is free. This is your greatest wealth is going to be having people that that you can count on no matter what.
Right, of course.
If shit goes sideways in your life, there's always going to be someone there to help you out. And that's true wealth. That's
Right.
what true wealth is. And
that's results. Yeah, exactly. We're talking about focusing on building the society. Focus on the interpersonal relationships. Not so much the focus of the magic being on, well, what do we do in this ritual space during this ritual, but more importantly, like, well, how do we all relate to each other afterwards? And magic and you're in groups like this, most of the time is spent downtime. You don't spend all your time in the ritual chamber, and the time outside of the ritual chamber, that's how you're living. That's the result, that's the proof and result or whatnot, if you will. I just think it's a little bit different approach. I think a different approach than is might be able to change things a little bit as far as the magic scene and how people think about that, how they do it.
Let's describe a little what our usual meetings are like. So what we'll do is we find a place that's private, either a person's home or a campground or something. We bring everyone together. We use Facebook. It's easy to organize things. So we've got a bunch of people, in Kansas and Missouri that basically Evelyn taught. She met through other means who are all part of this. And then there's us who's in the IoT and a whole bunch of other people. And we just kind of get together. And it starts out with, everyone who wants to will bring a ritual. And we'll each do a ritual, and we'll do a ritual round. And in between is the party. People are drinking, people are talking, people are just having a good time. They're dancing, there's drumming, and all that sort of thing. And to me, that whole mix is what encompasses the Sabbat.
Right. Yeah, I would say too. It's a lot more. The way that OM kind of meets and the way that OM stuff kind of goes is way more organic, than kind of the traditional ways of having magical meetings where you might have okay, we come, we do this work, and then we might hang out a little bit later. It tend to be like several day ordeals.
Yeah.
But that's that's your basic kind of framework, and I would say the OM, really around Babylon is kind of where the whole thing is kind of sprung up around. And of course, obviously, Evelyn was a big part of that, and IoT members have been through there, but that festival has kind of sprung off kind of a lot of the big moments kind of as we've been developing over the years.
Well, that festival has almost become a meeting of the tribes. We're one tribe, and then there's a tribe of OTO folks who are there, and then a tribe of neo-pagan people who come every year, and that's kind of just that grand gathering. And
right. Yeah, right. And I would see, OM just kind of an organic. Another thing that's kind of sprung up from that group. Originally there was all these different groups. It's kind of like all that mixing together every year in the summertime is kind of the brew which with OM was kind of formed. That's kind of more or less where it comes from. The idea of OM and something rather than thing. Because you've got all these different things. All these different traditions, all these different ways of doing magic, ways of looking at the universe and interacting with it. And, each of those traditions has its rules and doesn't really that. It just says that it's kind of all, under one thing.
All right. So anything else you guys wanted to talk about?
I don't know. What are we talking about here? So the topic is, what makes it different.
What makes it different?
Okay, well,
grades.
We could talk about the being no grades. Also, let's we talk for a minute about the Gutter Bible. I think that's really important. Gutter Bible was found. Okay, we have no idea where it came from. We have no idea. It's in several languages. It's not really translatable because it's a work of essentially somebody that has had a mental break. for one reason or another. Is either schizophrenic traditionally, or people have thought maybe someone that's had a stroke and is trying to get brain functionality back. But it's an extremely weird artifact in that nobody else has started up a religion from something that they found. But the Mormons claim to have found those gold plates. It's very unlikely there was ever any gold plates. We actually the Gutter Bible, and it out of some is found. I found it very genuine. You know, we were doing heavy Cthulhian magic. You know, it has a kind of air of Cthulhian, you know, Lovecraftian, you know, kind of sensibilities about it, you know, and it was, you know, that, you know, there were rituals done to discover a way to communicate with the old ones, you know, and then that was discovered, and, you know, when it was found right on the summer equinox, you know, totally unplanned, not like there wasn't a night of magic that, you know, we were out looking for some kind of inspiration for rituals. It was just something that I looked down and saw and found and was inspired to, like, kind of, you know, picked it up, thought it was really weird, threw it down, then picked it back up and kind of ran with it. And, like, I think that's really important. You know, right away people kind of, you know, it's all very ritual, like, you know, based, and people like to hear the story. People like to know about how it's developed. It's exciting. It's not been done before, and it's not something that I wrote or that you wrote. Like, I always felt that the Book of the Law, if it would have been found by Crowley, like stuff between some pages of an old grimoire, like deep in some, you know, library somewhere in Istanbul, it would have been more legitimate. He could have, like, he would have discovered this crazy ancient mystic thing and then been like, oh, it was, you know, blah, blah, blah. But the fact that he just wrote it himself, I always kind of found, like, you know, it's like, yeah, it's great, but you're essentially still saying, like, I'm God. You know, you're saying, like, I'm the one that has the, and we're not doing that with the Gutter Bible because we just found the fucking thing. It's just like a mirror. It's a shoe stone. And,
but you do have to pay us for a copy.
I'm not saying the Gutter Bibles are free. They are not. Nothing. I mean, the thing is, Gutter Bible's a magical tool. If it was free, you know, you wouldn't be putting anything into it. I don't know. What are your thoughts on the Gutter Bibles,
Yeah, I mean, it's the ramblings of an insane person. I think it's intriguing and beautiful. I think it's as deep and fascinating as it is, like, just crazy utterances of bullshit and nonsense. But I think that kind of, like, somewhere in between the two, you know, profound and utter nonsense, like, it kind of, you have been able to pull a beautiful project out of it. My own personal experience is just working with it with you. I found it mostly to be a very, like I said, a very crazy energy. And when I say crazy, I mean literally crazy energy. Something about it feels slightly dangerous, but not. I'm not sure how to explain that. You know what I mean? Just like there's a particular edge to it that doesn't feel as safe as traditional magic. You know what I mean? It's sort of the way that parents probably viewed rock and roll when it first happened. You know? Like,
well, Madrill has said before. He's like, you know, a good tantric friend of ours, tantric Buddhist friends of ours. Madrill has before. He's been like, you know, you do a lot of Cthulhu magic and you do a lot of, like, dark stuff and everything, but when it comes down to it, like, it's still, like, people know in the back of their minds that, like, it's a fiction, it's from a book. But with the Gutter Bible, it's not fiction, and it's not from a book. It's from reality. It's from a real place and a real person. So, I mean, subconsciously, when people do that magic, like, you don't have that thing to fall back on, you know, which makes it a little bit more dangerous. You can't, you know, in your subconscious be like, oh, well, Cthulhu is still just a plushie, because, like, there's no, like, Gutter Bible plushies. Like,
I would like to mention a little point on that. There's something that's very interesting, that H.P. Lovecraft, in the story The Call of Cthulhu, he actually puts dates of when things happen. He has specific dates. So when he's writing this thing out, the same date that the dreamers all have the dream and go insane, and the same date that the voodoo Cthulhu cult in New Orleans is having this nasty ritual to summon Cthulhu.
Right.
Those were both the same day the Book of the Law was written.
Interesting.
Just saying. Just that there's a connection. There's a connection.
Well, I mean, that wouldn't surprise me. Another thing, going back to the insanity, which I wanted to touch on this, like I've always found that to be very much of, you know, my spirituality, like from the beginning, kind of when I lost my mind the first time, is it's very much like, you know, the realm of the gods, you know, the realm of religion, you know, this is the realm of insanity. I mean, like, you know, it's Abraham that hears the voices, and you got to start cutting our penises off, and then he's going to kill his son, and like that's totally legitimate in like religious, you know, context. And even some of the shit that Buddha did, and certainly a lot of the shit that, you know, his crazy ass followers and some of these different obscure traditions did over the years, it's just like, you know, is this person just insane? You know, it's just like one guy was like so enlightened that he just would, you know, like dig up dead bodies and like, you know, wear their skin around town, and did this for years to prove some kind of dharmic principle. And it's like, yeah, really? Or was he just batshit fucking crazy? Like, you know, and so the idea that it comes from insanity, I mean, that, you know, getting back to consciousness, you know, malleable and depending on your mind and your viewpoint. I mean, schizophrenics, people that are extremely insane, literally do hallucinate and see like these alternate worlds that are as real to them as, you know, anything is going to be as real to us on the outside of sanity. And I, you know, I've always felt that, you know, that kind of slip in between, you know, having it, you know, how the human mind works before it snaps is kind of like, that's kind of where the realm of magic is. It's certainly been the realm of where spirituality comes from. If you read a lot of these old religious, some of these religious leaders, you know, a lot of them are nuts.
Well, isn't the key to magic to get people to believe your own insanity?
Yeah, there you go. That's why I've always thought that the Mormons were great magicians. I mean, the guy in one lifetime had a huge following. Crowley was always.
I mean, if you look at culture at large, I mean, to be honest, you know, it's the musings of one crazy person's paradigm won out over all the others, and you know, and thus we have society. So, you know, it's just its own large crazy paradigm. That's really, when you look at it, pretty fucking crazy as well. So I think you have a great point there.
Well, we are coming up on the hour. Is there anything that you guys want to wrap up with? Maybe David Zai, if there's anything that you are still wondering about or thinking about.
Not necessarily for this particular episode. I don't think. I think that any other things that I have that I'm thinking about could probably be held off until next time. So chill
Jason?
to the next episode.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I think that's good. We leave on the it is the first paradigm that is inspired entirely by the scribblings of a lunatic, rather than, you know, some people might say Crowley's scribblings are lunatic, but no, there's certainly like a lot more structure there. Like we're starting right from the mouth of madness, and that definitely, if nothing else, makes EMK unique from all the other paradigms that are out there.
All right. Well, hey, that leads us to come to our website, scrollofThoth.com, and there you will find links to where you can purchase the Gutter Bible. You can go straight to lulu.com or buy it at Amazon if you're an Amazon Prime member. So that, if you're interested, it is out there. Also, we have our donate button out there for PayPal. What we're hoping to do right now is do the podcast every 2 weeks, every other Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. So that will be on the YouTube channel for Frater Threscoronis, and I'll have a link to that on the webpage. People can come, they can ask questions, stuff like that. Gentlemen, do you have social media? Do you want people to talk to you on social media?
I don't mind, yeah.
Okay. How would they contact you, Jason?
You can find me at Jason Goff Gough on Facebook. That's fine. You shoot me messages if you want.
I will put a link to that. And David?
I mean, my Facebook is by my name, Sator Latrantis, my magical name. So SATOR and LATRANTIS. So if they want to shoot me messages, I don't do a whole lot with it, but I look at it and I will certainly respond to messages if they come through to me.
And
yeah, right on. People got questions about stuff. I'm down for that. Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, if you have questions, please feel free also to email us at james@scrollofThoth.com. So thank you very much, gentlemen. People can contact me, by the way, jameslwilbur.com, and also the scrollofThoth.tumblr.com. We're gonna hit end broadcast. You guys stay on the line for a little bit. We'll talk a little bit more, okay?
Sounds good.